I'm not sure if you guys have been paying attention. I posted one of them on Twitter yesterday, but in the OCG, they're getting a couple, or I guess more than a couple, alternate artwork cards of some fan favorite choices. Now, these are coming out in their Rarity Collection Premium Gold Edition. I don't know when these are coming out or if they're coming out in the TCG, but these are really awesome. Not only are the card choices themselves really good, you know, they're cards that a lot of people like, but also the new artworks are fantastic. They did a really great job with the ones that they've revealed so far. Now, I'm sure more cards are going to be revealed over the next couple days at least, but maybe even the next couple weeks. I'm not sure how many of these are actually going to come out, but Tour Guide from the Underworld by far is my favorite. I posted this on Twitter yesterday, and this artwork is just so good. So Tour Guide is front and center, and she's actually guiding a tour, which is really cool. She's not just outside the bus that the tour is going to go on. I appreciate including Tardy Orc, because even though he was tardy, he still eventually made that tour bus, which is awesome. And then finally, I mean, my favorite part of this card, which you probably saw me post about, it's my new profile picture on Twitter, is the Sangan at the very bottom. I mean, just look at him. He's so cute. He's so much shorter than all the other characters, and while I'm not a big fan of actually playing Sangan in decks that I take to tournaments, I still do feel like, and I'm sure a lot of you guys feel like, he's sort of become the unofficial mascot of the channel over this past dueling season, just because of how much I have a love-hate relationship with the card itself. The reason I bring this up is because the very first alternate artwork card revealed was Dark Magician Girl, the Dragon Knight. And this artwork is really cool. I think people are going to be excited to pick it up, but more importantly, this card is the cover card for an old set, Dragons of Legend. In today's video, I want to talk about this set and some of the really good competitive as well as the really good casual cards in it, because I've talked in the past about how it's very difficult to make a balanced Yu-Gi-Oh set in terms of appealing to casual players and competitive players and all sorts of players in between. And I say this set surprised everyone because anime cards, you know, there's sort of a mixed bag, because sometimes you get cards that are really, really good in the anime, and then when they get imported into the physical trading card game, they get nerfed a bunch. You also have anime cards that are so specific in use because they were only used in one anime moment that no one would ever want to play them even without them being nerfed. So it's pretty surprising and pretty unlikely for a pack like this with so many anime cards to leave a whole bunch of them really playable and really competitive. Another reason this set was a fan favorite just in general was because many of the best competitive cards were not very expensive. This is an all holographic set, but that doesn't necessarily always mean the competitive cards are not expensive. We've certainly seen short prints in the past. So you have this really cool mix of casual cards and competitive cards, and the cards people want to pull the most, cards that we'll talk about in this video, aren't even that expensive, which is great for budget competitive players. I've had a couple of them on the screen already, but yes, cards like the Eye of Timaeus and all the support that goes with that were some of the biggest selling points of this set, especially for fans of the anime. These were things that people have been asking for years, and now they finally were physical cards. The one major downside here is that these cards were the main short prints of the set, which was really disappointing because that meant they were a lot more expensive than some budget players could get their hands on. I will say that in general, this is a lot more preferable to the competitive cards being short printed and very expensive, because those are cards people want to play like in tournaments and need to buy, whereas these ones are more for casual friendly strategies. It's good that these cards eventually got reprinted, but I know it was frustrating for some people at the beginning because they were so hard to find. You also had some god card support. You had Ragh's Disciple as well as Mound of the Bound Creator, two pretty decent cards for making the god cards a little less bad. This still didn't make them like competitively viable even as a rogue strategy, but they were cool for fans of that sort of Egyptian god card deck. While both of these cards are designed for god cards and Ragh's Disciple really only works with them, at least Mound of the Bound Creator did see some experimentation outside of that sort of strategy. We saw it in Gishkis, we saw it in Malefics occasionally, which is kind of cool because even though Mound of the Bound Creator was not necessarily created for decks besides the Egyptian god card strategy, it ended up being pretty good support for basically any deck playing level 10 monsters for years to come. But I also want to focus on not just the casual cards, as fun as those are, but also talk about some of the heavy hitting competitive cards that were released in Dragons of Legend. First off, we have one of the most absurd cards ever printed in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, currently banned, and that is Soul Charge. So this thing is like a Monster Reborn. Well, actually, it's more like 5 Monster Reborns, and yes, it has some downsides. You lose 1,000 life points every monster you bring back. You can't attack that turn, but oh my gosh, it just doesn't matter at all. This card was so crazy, but this card actually wasn't as popular when it was first released as you might think. You see, see, 2014 Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a very different time in the game's history. Not every single deck could super combo off like they can in 2020 or even over the past couple of years. So in 2014, when this card came out, while it did make an impact in certain decks and was very good in some strategies like Infernities or Mythic Rulers or Lightstone Rulers or Sylvans, there were a whole bunch of other decks like Girgia and Trap Tricks and all those strategies that, while they might have played like 1 or 2 soul charges, they probably didn't play 3 copies, and some people chose to not play it at all. This, of course, is pretty funny in hindsight. Soul Charge is by far the most broken card in this set, one of the craziest cards ever printed, and it eventually would become like a staple 3 of just a few formats after it would come out before it got limited and then eventually down the road got banned. Soul Charge taught Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, if they didn't already know, that life points don't matter that much. I mean, they certainly matter a little bit, and I've talked about that in the past, and they will matter in some cases more than others, but if you're summoning 5 monsters from your graveyard and setting up a gigantic board, those 5,000 life points do not matter that much. Besides Soul Charge, by far the biggest impact immediately fell on the format by Dragons of Legend came from Fire and Ice Hand. So these cards are pretty outdated, and those of you that are playing modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And didn't play back in 2014 probably don't understand how good these cards were. Basically, Fire Hand, when it was destroyed, you could target an opponent's monster, blow it up, and then special summon an Ice Hand from your deck. Ice Hand had a very similar effect, except instead of destroying monsters, it destroyed back row and summoned the Fire Hand. That was extremely difficult for many 2014 strategies to deal with. The main problem here is that they are not once per turn effects. So if you have, say, 6 total copies of these cards and your opponent has a whole field, you can just keep crashing into stuff and blow up all of their back row and all of their monster cards without really doing anything else. These cards were extremely efficient and very difficult for a lot of decks to deal with. You saw a lot of cards being played to get around these cards specifically. Abyss Dweller was really great at dealing with the hands, even more than almost any other card in the game. And these things even saw play through like 2015. You know, you saw these cards in Necros even as a way to sort of break boards and get through decks that played a lot of back row. The chances of either of these cards seeing competitive play in the future is almost 0, just because the game has progressed to a point where we have a lot of other ways to deal with both back row and monster cards, but for a while these were like the go-to options for breaking boards. Going second and even going first, just setting a Fire Hand was a pretty solid play against a variety of decks. Even though Soul Charge is better than Fire and Ice Hand, especially in a more modern context, Fire and Ice Hand were by far the second most powerful cards out of Dragons of Legend. Wiretap was also originally released in Dragons of Legend, and this card is even still seeing play right now 6 years later. Wiretap is a very effective counter trap. It's basically an upgraded version of 7 tools of the Bandit. Not only does it not have a life point cost, which is pretty cool I guess, more importantly this card shuffles the trap back into the opponent's deck instead of just negating it and sending it to the graveyard. Why does that matter? Well, it matters for a few reasons. In some cases, although not all cases, but in a few cases your opponent's trap cards actually will have graveyard effects, and in that way this card is a lot better. But more importantly, when you get in a back and forth match with a lot of trap cards being played, when you're trying to address your opponent's board, you want to be drawing spells and monster cards, not really traps. So when your opponent hits you with a Wiretap, they're basically just putting a dead draw back into your deck that you don't really want to have. Believe it or not though, there was a crazy time in Yu-Gi-Oh's history when there were so many traps in the format that people were not only main decking 3 copies of Wiretap, but also extra copies of 7 tools of the Bandit. And while that probably will never happen again, I can't imagine that many trap cards getting played, Wiretap still has been a fantastic side deck option against cards like Red Reboot and Evenly Match for trap-based strategies. Mathematician was also released in this set, and it was a very strange situation because this thing basically saw no play upon release. That might sound crazy, especially seeing the card very recently saw play last format in a ton of Orcus decks, but when this card first came out, there just wasn't a lot to play it in. I mean, the combo decks didn't really want to use it, the control decks had no purpose for it, so it just didn't really see any play. I actually remember this card being like a $5 secret rare for a long time, like month after month after month. That was until Duelist Alliance, the next sort of main core set after that season of Yu-Gi-Oh was concluded, and that changed everything because now you wanted this card for Burning Abyss and you wanted it for Shaddolls, and suddenly it was a $20 secret rare. I actually remember sitting at the NAWCQ from 2014 when this card was $5, and I watched someone buy like over 1,000 copies of this card, which I thought was absolutely insane. However, it turned out that guy probably made a lot of money selling these even for $15 a copy, but more likely like $20 a copy, so I guess he knew what he was doing. But yeah, Mathematician did not see a lot of play when it first came out, but continued to be one of the better cards from the set as the years went on. This might be a little bit surprising with hindsight, but Curry Bandit actually saw a lot more play than Mathematician, at least when Dragons of Legend was first released. This thing might seem slow nowadays, but it was really good back in the day. It was good in Sylvans because it fixed your hand and also set up your graveyard and also triggered these Sylvan effects. It was really good in Lightsworn Rulers as well for adding some powerful spells to your hand in the end phase like Soul Charge, but it was even played in a weird deck called Cat, K-A-T, Curry Bandit Artifact Trap Tricks. It was basically a version of Hat that didn't play the hands and instead played Curry Bandit. The main advantage here is that you could dig through to your powerful trap cards like Artifact Sanctum, but you also set up your graveyard for things like Call of the Haunted. I like that strategy a lot. It was very unique, and while this card is probably too slow for modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, it was really good for the format that it was released in. Lastly, there's that Carbon Dinosaur level 3 monster. This thing is not the most competitive card in the set, but it has topped a couple different events and certain combo strategies, and it is worth mentioning that when Dragons of Legend was first released, this card was completely awful. It wouldn't even see experimentation for a little while. What's also funny is that this card actually was featured in some combos with Mathematician as a means to send it to the grave from the deck. Not the most competitive card in this set, but it certainly is still seeing some experimentation or some discussion, so I will mention it in today's video. I get a little bit sad when I see people mention that this set was only good because of Soul Charge, because it really had so much more to offer to the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. Anyway though, I hope you guys enjoyed today's discussion video. I'll catch you in the next one. Goodbye.